The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace, as thousands of tourists gathered for the daily changing of the guard ceremony. Among them stood 7-year-old Emma Thompson, her small hands gripping the handles of her bright pink wheelchair. Her parents, Sarah and Michael, had saved for months to bring their daughter to London, hoping to show her the famous royal guards she had seen so many times in picture books. Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement as she watched the tall, imposing figures in their red tunics and black bearskin hats march in perfect formation. She had been born with spina bifida, which left her unable to walk, but her spirit remained unbroken. Her wheelchair was decorated with small British flag stickers that she had carefully placed there herself the night before. The crowd pressed closer as the ceremony began, and despite her parents' efforts to find a good viewing spot, Emma found herself surrounded by a wall of adults. She could barely see over the shoulders and backs of the people in front of her. Her father lifted her slightly, but she was still too far away to get the clear view she had dreamed of during the long flight from their home in Ohio. Guard James Mitchell, standing at attention near the palace gates, noticed the little girl, in the wheelchair, struggling to see. At 28 years old, he had been serving as a Queen's Guard for 6 years. He knew the strict rules that governed his behavior during ceremonies. Guards were not supposed to break formation, speak to tourists, or show any emotion while on duty. Their job was to remain perfectly still, like living statues, regardless of what happened around them. But something about Emma's disappointed expression tugged at his heart. He watched as she tried to lean forward in her wheelchair, her small face filled with determination. Her parents whispered encouraging words, but James could see the frustration building in the child's eyes. She had come so far to see this moment, and the crowd was preventing her from experiencing the magic she had imagined. The other guards maintained their positions, staring straight ahead, as they had been trained to do. The tourists continued to push forward, unaware that their enthusiasm was blocking a little girl's once-in-a-lifetime experience. James felt torn between his duty and his compassion. He had sworn an oath to follow protocol, but he also understood the importance of kindness and human connection. As the minutes ticked by, James made a decision that would change everything. He began to shift his weight slightly, preparing to do something that could potentially end his career. The ceremony continued around him, but his focus had narrowed to one small girl who just wanted to see the guards she had admired from thousands of miles away. Emma's mother noticed tears forming in her daughter's eyes. The trip had been expensive, and they had planned this moment for so long. Sarah felt helpless as she watched her daughter's disappointment grow. She considered asking people to move, but the crowd was so dense and excited that she doubted anyone would hear her over the noise of cameras clicking and tourists chattering. The morning that had started with such promise now seemed headed for heartbreak, and none of them could have predicted what would happen next. Without warning, Guard James Mitchell stepped forward from his position. The movement was subtle at first, just a single step away from his designated spot near the palace wall. His fellow guards remained motionless, their eyes fixed straight ahead, but James could feel their surprise even though they couldn't show it. The tourists nearby began to notice something unusual happening. A few people turned their heads, confused by seeing a guard move during what was supposed to be a perfectly choreographed ceremony. James walked slowly and deliberately through the crowd, his tall frame and distinctive uniform causing people to step aside automatically. Emma's parents were among the first to realize that the guard was walking directly toward them. Sarah's heart began to race, wondering if they had somehow broken a rule or if Emma's wheelchair was in a restricted area. Michael instinctively moved closer to his daughter, unsure of what was happening but ready to protect her if necessary. But as James approached, his stern expression softened slightly. He stopped directly in front of Emma's wheelchair and did something that made the entire crowd gasp in amazement. He carefully removed his tall bearskin hat, revealing his kind face and gentle brown eyes. Then, he knelt down on one knee, bringing himself to Emma's eye level. The little girl's mouth fell open in wonder. She had never been this close to a real royal guard before, and she certainly never expected one to kneel down just for her. James looked directly into her eyes and spoke in a quiet, warm voice that only she and her parents could hear clearly. "Hello there, young lady. he said with a genuine smile. "I noticed you were having trouble seeing the ceremony from back here. Would you like to come with me to get a better view?" Emma was so surprised she could barely speak. She nodded eagerly, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her parents looked at each other in shock, not quite believing what they were witnessing. Other tourists began pulling out their phones and cameras, sensing that something special was unfolding before their eyes. James stood up and gently took hold of Emma's wheelchair handles. "May I?" he asked her parents politely. Sarah and Michael nodded, still too stunned to find their voices. They followed as the guard began to push their daughter's wheelchair through the crowd, which parted like the Red Sea to make way for this unexpected procession. The ceremony was still continuing, but many of the tourists had turned their attention to the remarkable scene playing out before them. Here was a member of one of the world's most elite military units, someone trained to show no emotion and follow strict protocol, breaking every rule to help a disabled child have a better experience. James pushed Emma's wheelchair all the way to the front of the crowd, positioning her in the perfect spot to see the entire ceremony unfold. The other guards continued their duties, marching and performing their movements with precision, but several of them managed subtle glances toward their colleague and the little girl he was helping. Emma's face lit up with pure joy as she finally had an unobstructed view of the guards in their magnificent uniforms. She could see every detail of their movements, every gleam of their polished boots, and every perfectly timed step of their formation. It was everything she had imagined, and more. As James knelt beside Emma's wheelchair at the front of the crowd, something magical began to happen. The tourists who had witnessed his act of kindness started to move closer, but not to get a better view of the ceremony. Instead, they were drawn to the heartwarming scene of the guard and the little girl. A middle-aged woman from Australia was the first to approach. She had been watching the entire interaction and felt moved by what she had seen. "Excuse me," she said softly to Emma's parents. "Would it be all right if I took a photo of your daughter with the guard? This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen at a royal ceremony." Before Sarah could respond, Emma looked up at James with sparkling eyes. "Are you really a Queen's Guard?" she asked in her small, excited voice. James smiled warmly and nodded. "I am indeed. And you know what? You're one of the bravest visitors I've ever met. It takes courage to travel so far from home." The conversation between the guard and the little girl caught the attention of more tourists. A family from Japan approached, followed by a couple from Germany. They all wanted to meet Emma and thank James for his incredible gesture. What started as a simple act of kindness was quickly becoming something much larger. James realized that he had created quite a scene, but he wasn't concerned about the potential consequences. Seeing Emma's happiness made every possible disciplinary action worth it. He continued to chat with her about her journey to London, her favorite things about England, and her dreams of seeing the Queen's horses. Meanwhile, other guards in the ceremony had begun to notice what was happening. While they couldn't break formation themselves, several of them managed to catch James's eye and give him subtle nods of approval. Even his commanding officer, who was watching from a distance, seemed more impressed than angry. The crowd around Emma and James continued to grow, but it wasn't chaotic or pushy. Instead, there was a sense of reverence and joy. People were genuinely moved by witnessing such pure human kindness in action. Many had tears in their eyes as they watched the interaction unfold. A young boy from Canada who was about Emma's age rolled forward in his own wheelchair. His parents had noticed Emma and wanted their son to meet her. "Hi," he said shyly. "I use a wheelchair too. Isn't this the coolest thing ever?" Emma beamed with excitement at meeting another child who understood her experience. James noticed the second wheelchair and immediately understood the significance of the moment. He was no longer just helping one child have a better view. He had inadvertently created a space where children with disabilities could feel celebrated and included in a way that rarely happened at such formal events. The original ceremony continued in the background, but for many of the tourists present, the real show was happening right in front of them. They were witnessing something that couldn't be planned or scripted, genuine human compassion breaking through the rigid protocols of royal tradition. Emma's parents stood nearby, overwhelmed with gratitude and emotion. They had hoped their daughter would enjoy seeing the guards, but they never imagined she would become the center of such an outpouring of love and support from strangers from around the world. The guards' simple decision to step out of line was creating ripple effects that none of them could have predicted. Word of what was happening began to spread beyond the immediate crowd. Tourists who had missed the initial interaction were being told about it by others, and soon people from all corners of the palace courtyard were making their way over to see the guard and the little girl in the wheelchair. But this wasn't just idle curiosity. The crowd that gathered around Emma and James was different from typical tourist gatherings. People approached quietly and respectfully, many with tears in their eyes. They had been touched by witnessing such a pure act of human kindness, and they wanted to be part of something beautiful. An elderly gentleman from Scotland approached James and shook his hand firmly. "Son," he said in a thick accent, "I served in the military for 30 years, and I've never seen anything more honorable than what you just did. You've made this old soldier proud." James felt a lump form in his throat as he thanked the veteran for his kind words. Emma, meanwhile, was having the time of her life. She was surrounded by friendly faces from around the world, all wanting to hear about her journey and share in her excitement. A group of teenagers from France started a small chant of "Emma, Emma," which made her giggle with delight. She had never been the center of so much positive attention before. Sarah and Michael watched in amazement as their daughter blossomed under all the love and support she was receiving. At home, Emma sometimes felt different or left out because of her wheelchair. But here, surrounded by strangers who had been moved by her story, she felt like the most important person in the world. A professional photographer who had been documenting the ceremony approached the family. "I hope you don't mind," she said, "but I've been taking pictures of this incredible moment. Would you like me to send them to you? I think your daughter might like to have some photos to remember this day." The parents gratefully accepted her offer, knowing these would become treasured family memories. James checked his watch and realized that the official ceremony was nearly over. Soon he would need to return to his duties and face whatever consequences awaited him for breaking protocol. But as he looked around at the joy and connection he had helped create, he knew he would make the same choice again without hesitation. The other guards in James's unit were finishing their ceremonial duties, but several of them made subtle gestures toward Emma as they passed by her position. One guard gave her a small salute when his commanding officer wasn't looking. Another managed to catch her eye and gave her a barely noticeable wink that made her burst into delighted laughter. The crowd began to realize that this special moment was coming to an end. But instead of dispersing, they started to organize themselves. Someone suggested that they all sing "God Save the King" together in Emma's honor. The idea caught on quickly, and soon dozens of voices from different countries were joining together in song. Emma listened to the international chorus with wonder. People who had never met before, who spoke different languages and came from different cultures, were united in celebrating her experience. It was a moment that transcended all the boundaries that usually separate people. James stood at attention beside Emma's wheelchair as the song filled the air around them. He had expected to get in trouble for his actions, but instead he had accidentally created one of the most beautiful moments he had ever witnessed in his years of service. The rigid protocols of royal ceremony had given way to something much more meaningful: human connection and compassion. As the impromptu singing came to an end, James knew he had to return to his official duties. But before he could step away, Emma reached up and tugged gently on his red tunic. When he knelt down beside her wheelchair once more, she whispered something in his ear that made his eyes well up with tears. "Thank you for making me feel special," she said softly. "I'll never forget you, Mr. Guard." James smiled and whispered back, "You are special, Emma. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise, and you can call me James." The crowd watched this tender exchange with deep emotion. Many people were openly crying now, moved by the pure innocence and gratitude of the little girl and the genuine care shown by the guard. It was a reminder of the simple power of human kindness to transform an ordinary moment into something extraordinary. But the most surprising reaction came from an unexpected source. James's commanding officer, Major William Harrison, had been watching the entire scene unfold from his position near the palace entrance. Instead of looking angry or disapproving, he was approaching the group with what appeared to be admiration in his eyes. The crowd grew quiet as the major walked directly toward James and Emma. Everyone expected him to reprimand the guard for breaking protocol, but what happened next shocked everyone present. Major Harrison stopped in front of Emma's wheelchair and snapped to attention, giving her a perfect military salute. "Miss Emma," he said in his crisp military voice, "it has been an honor to have you as our guest today. Guard Mitchell has shown exceptional judgment in ensuring that you had the proper experience befitting such a distinguished visitor." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers at this unexpected endorsement from the commanding officer. James looked at his superior with surprise and gratitude. He had been prepared to accept whatever punishment came his way, but instead he was being publicly supported for his actions. Major Harrison leaned in close to James and spoke quietly. "That's exactly the kind of guard I want representing the crown. Well done, Mitchell." Emma beamed with pride at being called a distinguished visitor by such an important military officer. Her parents were overwhelmed with emotion, hardly believing that their daughter was being treated like royalty by the actual royal guards. The trip had exceeded their wildest expectations. The photographer who had been documenting everything approached Major Harrison with a respectful request. "Sir, would it be possible to arrange for an official photo of Miss Emma with the guards? I think this moment deserves to be properly recorded." The major considered this for a moment, then nodded his approval. What followed was an impromptu photo session that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. James knelt beside Emma's wheelchair while several other guards gathered around them, all smiling genuinely for the camera. The crowd of tourists formed a semicircle around them, everyone wanting to be part of this historic moment. During the photo session, something even more remarkable happened. Word of the heartwarming scene had somehow reached the palace staff. Inside Buckingham Palace, a palace representative appeared at the main gate, carrying an official envelope with the royal seal. The representative approached Emma and her family with great ceremony. "Miss Thompson," he said formally, "Her Majesty's household has been informed of your visit today and the exceptional service you received from our guards. The Queen would like to present you with this official certificate of appreciation for your visit to Buckingham Palace." The crowd gasped in amazement as Emma received an official document from the Queen herself. Her small hands shook with excitement as she held the elegant certificate, which declared her an honorary friend of the royal household. It was signed with the Queen's personal seal and dated that very day. As the afternoon sun began to set over Buckingham Palace, the extraordinary day was coming to an end, but its impact would last forever. Emma sat in her wheelchair, clutching her royal certificate, surrounded by new friends from around the world, who had all exchanged contact information with her parents. The story of what had happened spread quickly beyond the palace gates. Tourists who had witnessed the events shared photos and videos on social media, and within hours, Emma and James's story was being shared across the globe. News outlets from different countries began covering the heartwarming tale of the royal guard who broke protocol to help a disabled child. James faced no disciplinary action for his decision. Instead, he was commended by his superiors and became something of a hero within the military community. Letters poured in from around the world, thanking him for showing that compassion and duty could work hand in hand. He was even invited to speak at military academies about the importance of human kindness in service. The Australian woman who had asked to take the first photo of Emma and James started a social media campaign called Kindness Like Emma's Guard. People from around the world began sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness and tagging the campaign. It became a global movement celebrating small acts of compassion that make a big difference. Emma's story reached a children's hospital in her hometown, where she became an inspiration to other young patients facing their own challenges. She was invited to speak to groups of children, sharing how one person's kindness had changed her entire perspective on what was possible in her life. Her confidence grew with each speaking engagement, and she discovered a passion for helping others feel valued and included. The royal certificate from the Queen was framed and hung in Emma's bedroom, but it wasn't the only memento from her incredible day. James had arranged for her to receive a small replica of a guard's bearskin hat, which became her most treasured possession. She wore it proudly whenever she told people about her adventure at Buckingham Palace. A year later, Emma and her family returned to London for a follow-up visit. James, who had been promoted for his exemplary service, was waiting for them at the palace gates. The reunion was emotional and joyful, with Emma presenting James with a handmade thank you card and a small American flag pin for his uniform. The second visit attracted even more attention than the first, as people remembered Emma's story from the year before. This time, the palace officials were prepared for the interest her presence would generate. They arranged for a special behind-the-scenes tour that allowed Emma to meet more of the guards and see parts of the palace normally closed to the public. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome of Emma's original visit was the lasting change it inspired in how the guards interacted with young visitors, especially those with disabilities. While they still maintained their professional dignity and followed protocol, they found small ways to make children feel seen and acknowledged during ceremonies. The ripple effects of one guard's decision to step out of line continued for years. Emma grew up to become a disability rights advocate, always crediting that moment at Buckingham Palace as the turning point, when she realized that her wheelchair didn't define her limitations. James remained with the Royal Guard, but he also began volunteering with organizations that served disabled children. Their friendship, which began with a simple act of kindness, became a lifelong connection that reminded both of them that the most important moments in life often come from choosing compassion over convenience. The day that started with a disappointed little girl trying to see over a crowd ended with a global reminder that individual actions, no matter how small they might seem, have the power to change the world one heart at a time.